The History of Action Figures. Part 2. The 80s Directions for Success.
We're off on a sales odyssey that exceeds a bounty hunter's dream. Zeroing in on your market like Han headed for Cloud City.
As the 70s came to a close, the landscape of action figures had changed, from how they were played with and to their size. Pushed to the back burner was the doll-sized figures that was once the standard of toy companies, with such lines as Mego's Superheroes and Mattel's G.I. Joe. Now, thanks to the success of Star Wars, figures were mostly scaled down to a better hand size, which allowed to have more play value and able to play with playsets and ships. Not only did Star Wars help bring in a new scale of action figures, it also brought in the 80s boom of movie and TV tie-in toys.
From the Black Hole Collection, it's Vincent.
Look, a black hole in space!
Mego, the company that turned down Star Wars, was now seeing its sales fall sharply and not wanting to make the same mistake they made in the 70s, was now trying to pay catch up and buying the license to everything they could get their hands on in hopes of the next Star Wars. They got the license for the Black Hole, Buck Rogers, Chips, Dallas, Doctor Who in the UK, Dukes of Hazzard, The Greatest American Hero, and lots more. Their next gamble to find the next Star Wars by buying up any license they could didn't pay off. By 1981, Mego reported losing over $4 million in sales and started to lay off staff in early 1982. And by that summer, the company filed bankruptcy. The once action figure powerhouse of the 70s was now closing down. Kenner, who had the rights to Star Wars, was by far the force of the action figure market, thanks to Star Wars alone. As its sequels, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, kept kids playing with Star Wars, it also brought in a lot of new fans to help figure sales.
Indy, over here! Indiana Jones, at your service, Toad. Ah!
However, Kenner was struggling with their other non-Star Wars action figure lines, such as their failed Indiana Jones line and the planned Alien line that never got off the ground after poor sales of its Alien figure. Fearing they might become the Star Wars toy company, Kenner knew it needed more than just Star Wars toys to stay a force in the toy market. With Kenner out looking for the next big thing, Mattel Toys had found it.
Who's the big guy with the muscles?
He's He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe.
Their 1982 He-Man Masters of the Universe line was the action figure line taking the bite out of Kenner's hold on the action figure market with their Star Wars line. As most companies were trying to compete with the look of Star Wars, Mattel decided to jump up the scale to 5.5 inches, and they also found a way to cut costs by giving most figures the same body and mold. Rather than try to get the next big thing, Mattel did something different. It made its own next big thing.
I am Adam, Prince of Eternia and defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend.
Mattel would help boost the toy sales by having its own Masters of the Universe cartoon and comic book series. The plan was paying off, and for the first time in 5 years, a toy line was outselling Star Wars. With He-Man growing in the toy aisles, and George Lucas saying the latest Star Wars film would be the last, at least for the foreseeable future, Kenner knew it had to do something, or it would lose to Mattel for sure. Kenner and the DC Comic Company struck a deal when Kenner licensed the DC comic book heroes Superman, Batman, and more for their Superpowers collection in 1984. The figures were 3.75 inches and had an action feature to give them more play value. Taking a note from Mattel's Masters of the Universe collection, DC released a Superpowers comic book series, and Hanna-Barbera released 2 Superpowers-related cartoons, Super Friends, the legendary Superpowers show, and the Superpowers team. He-Man was about to have strong competition from a group of superheroes that had been around for 2 decades. However, Hasbro was starting to gain ground with an old friend. In 1982, Hasbro relaunched the G.I. Joe action figure line. They scaled down G.I. Joe from his doll-like size to the more familiar Star Wars size of 3.75 inches. Taking the size from Kenner, they also took an idea from Mego's Micronauts by giving the figure more articulation, something the Star Wars figures were lacking. Hasbro also took a page from Mattel's He-Man playbook by releasing a G.I. Joe animated series and an ongoing comic book line. G.I. Joe was back, smaller but stronger than ever.
G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day.
The Millennium Falcon spaceship sells for $34.97. The Jedi characters, the figures, sell for $2.68. Some of the toys are action toys. If your child gets one, you may have to take it away with force.
With no films in the planning, and the success of Mattel's Masters of the Universe collection and Hasbro's G.I. Joe, Star Wars was starting to decline in sales, and younger kids were seeing Star Wars toys as toys their older brother played with. There was a lot more choices in the toy marketplace of 1985, and kids wanted to play with toys that they were currently seeing on television or reading in the comics. In 1985, Kenner pulled the plug on what was once the powerhouse of Kenner, and it moved its focus away from Star Wars to the Superpowers line. By this time, the directions on how to have a successful action figure line was written on the wall. It wasn't about movie tie-ins. It was having its own tie-ins, cartoon series, and comic book lines. Instead of going out to try to find the next big thing, toy companies were making the next big thing. Toy companies like LJN got the rights to make figures based on the Thundercats cartoon, as Kenner got the rights to make toys based on the real Ghostbusters cartoon. Almost every cartoon series, no matter how big or small, seemed to have their own action figure line. As kids were reenacting out episodes of their favorite cartoon with their action figure, Hasbro was about to change the landscape with a whole different type of action figure. Getting the US rights from the transforming toys from Takara, Hasbro launched the Transformers. These were surely not the action figures your brother played with. These gave a whole new meaning to the word action in action figures. The toys themselves could change from a vehicle, a device, or an animal into a robot action figure. It was like getting 3 toys in one: a robot, a vehicle, and a puzzle. Like most toys at the time, a Transformer comic book and cartoon series would air as the figures reached the stores. However, Hasbro took it a step further in 1986 with the release of the Transformer animated movie.
Transformers, the movie. Coming to a theater near you this August.
The action figure market was no longer being dominated by 1 or 2 action figure lines.
Sometime in the not-too-distant future, it's talking and electronic Robocop. Hands up!
There was almost an action figure line for every cartoon series kids were watching. As the 1980s were coming to a close, it was clear the big toy companies had found out how to succeed in the action figure market. Hasbro, Mattel, and Kenner all had successful action figure lines that were helped with a comic book series and a cartoon series. However, a small toy company was watching and taking note.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles! Heroes in a half shell! Turtle power!
Playmates Toys saw a small comic book series becoming a cult hit and insisted that a toy cartoon series be produced based on the comic book series Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This cartoon series was unlike the He-Man Superpowers or real Ghostbusters. This cartoon series was smartly written and humor that wasn't aimed just for small kids, but for an older crowd that was growing out of the more kiddie-type cartoons. With the cartoon series being a hit, in 1988, Playmates released the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action figures. And with it, they discovered something the big companies hadn't. There was a marketplace buying action figures who were not 11-year-old boys.
We're buying Star Wars toys.
Right. In a couple of years, they'll be worth a lot of dough. like a lot of other things.
You're buying them strictly as an investment.
Yes.
And as the 80s came to an end, the collector's action figure boom of the 90s began. And we'll tell you all about that in part 3.